See, I read this piece of work by Jung a long while back, and it was a meditation on the injunction to treat your neighbor as you would like to be treated, something like that. And what Jung pointed out, which I really liked, was that wasn't an injunction to be nice to other people. It was an invitation to reciprocity. It was something like this. It's like, you should figure out how you would like to be treated, like you were taking care of yourself, not how you would like people to respond to you. It's more important than that. It's like, imagine you had a child that you really cared for, and someone said, well, people will treat this child exactly like you want them to, but you have to figure out what that is. And so then you'd have to sit down for like a month and you'd think, okay, well, how do you want your child to be treated? You don't want everyone just to be nice to him, you know. You want people to challenge him, and you want people to discipline him, and you want people to tell him when he's wrong. It's like, you don't just want everyone to be nice. That's pathetic. It's pathetic. There's no challenge in that.
It's dangerous to stick your head up above the rest. I mean, it's predator avoidance strategy to keep your head down. And I mean that technically. It truly is. To blend in with the crowd is a predator avoidance strategy. That's what fish do in schools of fish. Like, it's very low-level behavior. And if you stick your head up, there's some real danger. And the advantage to that is that people are pretty civilized and they go along with the group, and that's a good thing, because, you know, we should be civilized and go along with the group, but it's a really bad thing when the group goes sideways. And I've had many people, colleagues, but many other people too, say, well, really, we agree with what you're doing, but we can't really take the risk of standing up and saying so. It's like, well, now and then, so most people fall into that camp. Well, when you're trying to do something hard, what your brain does is give you something else hard to do that's not quite as hard, so that you can feel justified in not doing the thing you're supposed to, because you're doing something else useful. And if you give in to that temptation, which you often will, then it wins, and because it wins, it gets a little dopamine kick and it grows stronger. Anything you let win, the internal argument, grows. And anything you let be defeated shrinks, because it's punished. It doesn't get to have its way. So that's another thing really to remember. Don't practice what you do not want to become. And because they're neurological circuits. You build those things in there, man. They're not going anywhere. You can build another little machine to inhibit them. That's the best you can do. Once they're in there, you can't get them out. And then the ones you build to inhibit can be taken out by stress, and the old habits will come back up. So you got to be careful what you say and what you do, because you build yourself that way. People's problems are far more complicated than their mere economic difficulties. It would be lovely, I was thinking about this the other day when I was writing, it would be lovely to believe that the 1%, you know, who control the world's resources are somehow protected in some fundamental way against the catastrophes and tragedies of existence. But they're not. You meet people who are well off, you know. They have a buffer. It's better than to be poverty-stricken. It's certainly better than to be homeless. But the relationship between happiness and income comes to a halt at about middle-class level. And I don't care how much money you have, you're still going to get Alzheimer's disease. You're still going to get cancer. The people that you love are still going to die. You're still going to fight with your children. You're still going to divorce your spouse. I mean, you're not protected nearly as well by your money as everybody would like to hope. You know, and that's actually rather sad. You don't ever want to use your illness as an excuse for not doing anything. Not consciously. You know, sometimes you might not know, I'm not feeling well. What can I do? Well, you don't know, right? Because sometimes when you're not feeling well, you can do more than you think, and sometimes you can do less than you think. It's not like it's obvious, but sometimes it's obvious. You know, this little temptation flits through your mind and you think, well, I don't really want to do what I'm doing today, and I'm not feeling very well, so I don't have to do it. You do that 100 times, then you don't know how sick you are anymore. And then you're in real trouble, because not only are you sick, but you've muddied the waters. And so you have both problems then, is you're actually ill and you've betrayed yourself by using that as an excuse not to pursue your responsibilities. And that, I think, if you do both of those things happen to you at the same time, you're in real trouble. And it's really hard not to have that happen. You'll have observed in your own life that when you're engaged in something that you believe in, that the time passes properly. You know, you can see this even if maybe you're reading a paper and it's actually related in some intelligible manner to something that you want to learn. So even though it's difficult, you get engaged in it, you can remember it better, you can process it better, and you're not so likely to fall asleep, and you're not so likely to want to find distractions, all of that. You can get into it. And it would be very interesting if that was proportionate to the degree of responsibility that you're willing to shoulder. And I think you can make a strong case for that. You want to constrain the anomalous event to the minimal necessary domain. It's really, really important. You want to do that when you're arguing with your partner, which you'll do all the time. We have an argument. Well, I should never have married you. It's like, no, that's not the first response. That's a bad response. Or here's a really good one. You've always done that sort of thing. And you always will. It's like, oh, good, great. It's like the only answer to that is to hit someone. Because like you're done, right? You're like that. You've always been like that. There isn't a chance that you can be repaired, and none of it is acceptable. It's like the person's going to fight with you right away, because what else are they going to do? So what you want to do is you want to minimize it. It isn't rationalization. You want to say, okay, this person did something that disrupted our joint map. Okay, what's the smallest possible thing they could do to put it back together? And you have to know. Well, we need to make a plan so you don't do it again. Or we need to have a discussion so that you know that it wasn't a good thing to do. It's like, don't have one plan. Right? If you're going to stake yourself on something, you should throw a couple of alternative scaffolds up beside you so that you have somewhere to go. You want to be a doctor. Okay. Well, you could be a nurse. It's like it's not a doctor, but it beats cutting your throat. You're still doing 80% of what you wanted to do. So you want to think about this during your whole life, man. If you're going to take a high risk, you want to scaffold yourself in other areas so that if it fails, the bottom doesn't drop out and you die. And it's also very much worth thinking about with regards to setting up your life in general. It's like, if you concentrate solely on your career, you can get a long way in your career. And I would say that that's a strategy that a minority of men preferentially do. People who are always pushing happiness as the key measure for successful existence, it's so ill-informed that it's embarrassing that even happens. Positive emotion makes people impulsive. Maniacs, for example, which is really, that's mania, right? Bipolar disorder. If you're manic, you're one happy person. Way too happy. Everything is great. Nothing but wonderful things that are beyond your imagination are going to happen to you, and they're going to happen fast. And so you're down to the mall to buy everything you can possibly get your hands on because you have 100 uses for everything. And then a week later, you crash into your depressive episode and you realize that you're $150,000 in debt and you've alienated everyone that you know. It's like that's untrammeled positive emotion. Now, maybe as a parent, you can be a model for emulation, so you're a model for imitation. What you say matters, but it doesn't matter as much as what you do. Maybe it would if what you said and what you did were the same. That's the ideal situation, right? That's what you want to do if you're a parent. If you say one thing and act differently, your kids will torture you to death, and they're right to do it too, because you're confused, and confusing them makes them anxious and aggressive, and they will go after you. Consistency, consistency, consistency. And if you can't provide it, you'll drive them crazy. So you want to bring your words and your actions into alignment, right? And that's part of the development of wisdom. We don't only want to know how to solve a problem. Just like we don't only want to know how to win a game. We want to know how to win the set of all possible games. And we want to solve the set of all possible problems. And so what the human beings have been trying to do for the last forever is trying to figure out how to solve the problem of the set of all problems. And we actually have some ideas. One is play to win the metagame and not the game. That's one solution. Another solution is go out into the unknown voluntarily and gather the information that lies there, because that continually updates you. The other one is to make sacrifices. And that was discovered in an articulate form not very long ago. And the idea of sacrifice is something like, well, you don't just have to solve the problem of how do you survive in the present, which is roughly the problem that animals are always trying to solve. You have to solve the problem of how you survive in the present, given that you also have to survive next week, next month, next year, and among other people. The consequence of raising a child in a healthy way is that the child is going to be curious enough to go out there and look for some trouble. And we actually know that because there is follow-up studies of teenagers. You imagine that there's teenagers who never break any rules. And then there's teenagers who break all the rules, okay? These teenagers don't do very well. Introverted, depressed, anxious, depressed. Sorry, I said that twice. These ones are antisocial. The ones in the middle, that's what you want. You want your damn teenager to get out of the paradisal confines of your house and to go cause some trouble and to investigate. Maybe you don't want to know about it any more than you have to. You don't want them to be breaking rules all the time, and you don't want them to be so timid and oppressed that they can't make a move on their own and never make a mistake. So the paradoxical thing here, and it's sort of echoed, this is why I like these two stories back to back, is like, if you give people what they want, then the first thing they're going to do is try to get beyond it. And this idea of incremental improvement is a great one. You know, if there are things about your life that are bothering you, or things about the world that are bothering you, then you want to decompose them into solvable sub-problems. And you do this, if you have a child, this is the sort of thing that you do naturally, right? Because you want to set your child a challenge that's sufficiently challenging to push them forward in their development. So that makes it meaningful for the child. That puts them in the zone of proximal development, which is where proper maturation takes place. They'll find that intrinsically meaningful. You want to make it challenging, but also with a reasonable probability of success. And there's an art to that. So you want to set yourself a task that's difficult, but not so difficult you can't attain it. And then what happens is that you step up improvement across time, incrementally. And there's also a certain element of humility to it, right? Which is, don't bite off more than you can chew, right? Don't set grandiose goals, but incremental improvement will get you a tremendous distance. The guaranteed basic income idea. It's like, well, that's predicated on the idea that man lives by bread alone. Well, that isn't how it works, and I've certainly seen that in my clinical practice. I've had clients, especially addicts, if you gave them money, they would die. And the reason for that, like one guy that I remember in particular, I liked him quite a bit. He had a bad cocaine problem. And as long as he was flat broke, he wasn't dead. But as soon as he was on disability, as soon as his disability check came in, he was face down in a ditch 3 days later. So, well, and you think, well, maybe that's a consequence of his overwhelming poverty, etc. You could come up with some social reason for that path that he took, but it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination that simple. It's like people need purpose more than money even. It isn't the provision of material well-being with ease that allows people to live properly, even though a certain amount of material wealth is a necessary precondition. It's purpose, and that's a much more difficult problem to solve. It's like we need something to grapple with. We need a meaning to justify our lives, and some of that is to be found in, well, the struggle against privation and malevolence. The mere offering of material sustenance to people isn't going to solve the problem. Dostoevsky knew this 150 years ago. He said if you gave people everything they wanted, so all they had to do was eat cakes and busy themselves with the continuation of the species, the first thing they do is smash it all to hell so that something interesting could happen. He said that's our fatal flaw and salvation, both of that wanting to contend rather than to sit back and have everything taken care of.